Some call it evolution, and others call it God. It is always advisable to perceive clearly our ignorance. Building a better mousetrap merely results in smarter mice. A man's friendships are one of the best measures of his worth. I never gave up Christianity until I was 40 years of age. Ignorance more frequently begets confidence than does knowledge.
It is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent that survives. It is the one that is the most adaptable to change, that lives within the means available and works cooperatively against common threats. The love for all living creatures is the most noble attribute of man. The most important factor in survival is neither intelligence nor strength but adaptability. The world will not be inherited by the strongest, it will be inherited by those most able to change. The impossibility of conceiving that this grand and wondrous universe, with our conscious selves, arose through chance, seems to me the chief argument for the existence of God. Nothing exists for itself alone, but only in relation to other forms of life. It is not the biggest, the brightest, or the best that will survive, but those who adapt the quickest. A man who dares to waste 1 hour of time has not discovered the value of life. The more one thinks, the more one feels the hopeless immensity of man's ignorance. Such simple instincts as bees making a beehive could be sufficient to overthrow my whole theory. In the long history of humankind, and animal kind, too, those who learn to collaborate and improvise most effectively have prevailed. An agnostic would be the more correct description of my state of mind. I cannot persuade myself that a beneficent and omnipotent God would have designedly created parasitic wasps with the express intention of their feeding within the living bodies of caterpillars. Much love, much trial, but what an utter desert is life without love. It is not the most intellectual of the species that survives, it is not the strongest that survives, but the species that survives is the one that is able best to adapt and adjust to the changing environment in which it finds itself. If I had my life to live over again, I would have made a rule to read some poetry and listen to some music at least once every week. Another source of conviction in the existence of God, connected with the reason and not with the feelings, impresses me as having much more weight. This follows from the extreme difficulty, or rather impossibility, of conceiving this immense and wonderful universe, including man with his capacity of looking far backwards and far into futurity, as the result of blind chance or necessity. When thus reflecting, I feel compelled to look to a first cause having an intelligent mind in some degree analogous to that of man, and I deserve to be called a theist. It is impossible to conceive of this immense and wonderful universe as the result of blind chance or necessity. Not one change of species into another is on record. We cannot prove that a single species has been changed. Animals, whom we have made our slaves, we do not like to consider our equal. On the ordinary view of each species having been independently created, we gain no scientific explanation. I ought, or I ought not, constitute the whole of morality. It is a cursed evil to any man to become as absorbed in any subject as I am in mine. In my most extreme fluctuations I have never been an atheist in the sense of denying the existence of a God. I think that generally, and more so as I grow older, but not always, that an agnostic would be the most correct description of my state of mind. I conclude that the musical notes and rhythms were first acquired by the male or female progenitors of mankind for the sake of charming the opposite sex. The highest possible stage in moral culture is when we recognize that we ought to control our thoughts. Man is descended from a hairy-tailed quadruped, probably arboreal in its habits. The question of whether there exists a creator and ruler of the universe has been answered in the affirmative by some of the highest intellects that have ever existed. It is not the conscience which raises a blush, for a man may sincerely regret some slight fault committed in solitude, or he may suffer the deepest remorse for an undetected crime, but he will not blush. It is not the sense of guilt, but the thought that others think or know us to be guilty which crimsons the face. The fact of evolution is the backbone of biology, and biology is thus in the peculiar position of being a science founded on an improved theory. Is it then a science or faith? I have no great quickness of apprehension or wit which is so remarkable in some clever men. For instance, Huxley, to kill an error is as good a service as, and sometimes even better than, the establishing of a new truth or fact. There is no fundamental difference between man and animals in their ability to feel pleasure and pain, happiness and misery. I believe we were all glad to leave New Zealand. It is not a pleasant place. Amongst the natives there is absent that charming simplicity. And the greater part of the English are the very refuse of society. The moral faculties are generally and justly esteemed as of higher value than the intellectual powers. The main conclusion arrived at in this work, namely that man is descended from some lowly organized form, will, I regret to think, be highly distasteful to many persons. But there can hardly be a doubt that we are descended from barbarians. Freedom of thought is best promoted by the gradual illumination of men's minds which follows from the advance of science. We feel surprise when travelers tell us of the vast dimensions of the pyramids and other great ruins, but how utterly insignificant are the greatest of these, when compared to these mountains of stone accumulated by the agency of various minute and tender animals. A moral being is one who is capable of reflecting on his past actions and their motives, of approving of some and disapproving of others. Even people who aren't geniuses can outthink the rest of mankind if they develop certain thinking habits.